My name is Marin Solis. I am 32 years old. And the Saturday evening my sister stood up at her own birthday dinner and told 31 guests that I had been faking my surgical recovery for 18 months was the night I finally understood that a person who has built their identity around being the capable one will not stop dismantling you when the facts change. They will simply find a more credentialed audience and say it louder. I want to tell you what happened at that dinner. But the dinner is 12 minutes inside a story that starts 3 years earlier, and if I begin there you'll understand not only what my sister said and why, but why the woman at table 6 set down her fork. My sister Coral is 3 years older than me. She is 35 now. She grew up, and I mean this in the most specific sense, as the version of the two of us that our family had decided to invest in, not because she was more loved but because she was more legible. She spoke early. She excelled without apparent effort. She was the one teachers mentioned by name at parent evenings, the one neighbors asked about when they ran into my mother at the grocery store. She went into finance, private wealth management at a regional firm called Allgate Advisory, and she was good at it, in the specific way that people are good at things they were told from birth they would be good at. The confidence preceded the competence, and the competence arrived to confirm it. I took a different path. I studied statistics at a state university my parents considered a backup school, graduated without a narrative they could deliver cleanly at dinner parties, and took a job as an insurance analyst at a company called Veritas Group that most of my family could not describe to their friends without a pause. I analyzed claim patterns, modeled risk, built systems for flagging anomalous billing across a portfolio of 347 corporate accounts. It was not glamorous. It was specific, and it was mine, and I was better at it than anyone around me knew, because I did not perform my competence for an audience and my family had long since stopped looking for it. This is the context. I am giving it to you, because what happened 18 months before that birthday dinner does not make sense without it. I was diagnosed with a spinal disc herniation in the spring of my 30th year, L4, L5, moderate to severe compression, the result of a combination of factors my physiatrist, Dr. Yolanda Ferris, described as partly genetic predisposition and partly the accumulated posture habits of someone who has spent 12 years at a desk without adequate ergonomic support. The diagnosis explained a year and a half of intermittent lower back pain I had been managing with ibuprofen and the specific self-deception available to people who prefer not to have the conversation that a doctor's visit requires. Dr. Ferris referred me to a spine specialist named Dr. Hannah Kuroda at the Regional Orthopedic Center, who reviewed my imaging and told me that the conservative approach, physical therapy, modified activity, a short course of targeted injections, was worth trying first, but that the degree of compression she was seeing meant surgery was likely on the horizon if the conservative measures did not produce adequate relief within 4 months. 4 months later, the conservative measures had not produced adequate relief. Dr. Kuroda performed a microdiscectomy in November. The surgery took 90 minutes. I was discharged the following day with a recovery protocol, a prescription for a short course of pain management, and a follow-up schedule that extended over the next 12 months. Dr. Kuroda told me, at my 2-week post-operative appointment, that the procedure had gone well and that the nerve was decompressing as expected, but that I should understand recovery from this kind of procedure was gradual, that the full return of nerve function could take anywhere from 3 to 12 months, that I would have good days and difficult days, and that managing the difficult days required patience with a timeline that did not always match what I wanted it to be. I told my family about the diagnosis when it happened and about the surgery when it was scheduled. My parents were concerned in the way they are concerned about things, briefly and at a distance, processing it through a lens of inconvenience rather than engagement. My mother asked, once, whether I was sure surgery was necessary. I said Dr. Kuroda had been clear that it was the appropriate next step given the imaging. My mother said she supposed the doctors knew best and moved on. Coral asked me, in a text message the week before the surgery, whether I had considered a second opinion. I said I had, that Dr. Kuroda's recommendation had been confirmed by the physiatrist and by a radiologist who had reviewed the imaging independently, and that I was comfortable with the decision. Coral said okay, and asked if I needed someone to drive me home after. I said Michael, my partner at the time, now my husband, would be taking me.
She said fine.
That was the last conversation we had about the surgery before it happened. What happened after is what the story is about. I was on modified work accommodation for 8 weeks following the surgery. Veritas Group had a medical leave policy that Coral found, when I mentioned it, excessive. 8 weeks for a back procedure was how she described it to our mother, in a conversation my mother later reported to me with the specific, uncomfortable honesty of a woman who thought she was sharing information rather than indicting herself. I was not taking 8 weeks because I wanted 8 weeks. I was taking 8 weeks because Dr. Kuroda's post-operative instructions specified 8 weeks of restricted activity, and because my job required extended sitting that was contraindicated during the healing phase. I followed the protocol because following the protocol was how you recovered from surgery without complicating the outcome, and because I had spent 3 years in insurance analytics and I understood what non-compliance looked like in a claim file, and I did not intend to be a case study in it. By month 3 post-surgery, I was back at my desk full-time. By month 5, I had the full return of function Dr. Kuroda had projected. By month 8, I was doing everything I had done before the surgery, with the addition of a daily exercise protocol Dr. Ferris had prescribed, and which I followed because I had learned, in the 8 weeks of modified activity, what it felt like to maintain my body's infrastructure rather than neglect it. My sister's account of my recovery developed in parallel to the actual recovery, in the specific way that alternative narratives develop when the person constructing them is not in contact with the primary source. I learned about it gradually, through my mother's inadvertent reports, through a cousin named Delphine who told me things with the careful precision of someone who wanted me to know and did not want to be the reason I knew. Coral had told Delphine that I was milking it. She had told a colleague who knew us both, a woman named Sasha, that I had turned a routine procedure into a personality. She had told our father, I learned this in month 9, when he mentioned it in passing during a Sunday dinner, that she was worried I had developed a dependence on being unwell and that the family should be careful not to reinforce it. Our father nodded at this, apparently, when she said it. My mother apparently changed the subject. Neither of them told me about the conversation until my father mentioned it in passing 9 months after it happened, in the tone of someone reporting something they had processed and set aside. I want to give Coral her structural explanation because I have spent 3 years developing one, and I believe it is more accurate than the simpler version. Coral had, since early adulthood, organized her identity around a specific kind of visible competence, visible being the operative word. Her achievements were legible. The promotion, the salary bracket, the conference she was invited to speak at, the apartment she bought at 31. Mine were not legible by the same metrics. Insurance analytics does not produce promotional material. Statistical modeling of claim anomalies does not generate a narrative that travels well at family gatherings. For the first 8 years of my career, I was in the family's accounting, the sister who was still figuring it out, and Coral had grown comfortable with that accounting. When I had the surgery, she encountered something that was legible, a concrete event, a period of accommodation, a visible need, and she interpreted it through the framework she had been using for years. In that framework, my needs were performances. My difficulties were constructed. My surgeon's timeline was a prop in a story I was telling about myself for sympathy. The framework was wrong, but it was internally consistent, and it had been applied consistently for long enough that she no longer felt the need to check it against the evidence. This is what I mean when I say her cruelty was not random. It was a mistake, an expensive and specific one, but it was structured. And structured mistakes have predictable failure points. I need to tell you how Dr. Hannah Kuroda came to be sitting at table 6 at my sister's birthday dinner. Coral turned 35 in March. She organized her own birthday dinner in the specific way she organized everything: a private dining room at a restaurant called the Severn House, 31 guests, a set menu she had negotiated personally, seating assignments she had revised 3 times. She invited people who mattered to her professional and social life, colleagues from Allgate, friends from university, a few family members including me and our parents and Delphine. She also invited, as a guest of her colleague Patrick, a woman named Dr. Hannah Kuroda, whom Patrick had met at a Hospital Foundation event and whose company he had been actively seeking for the previous 4 months. Dr. Kuroda did not know she was my surgeon until we saw each other in the entrance hall of the Severn House. I arrived at 6:45. Dr. Kuroda arrived at 6:50 with Patrick, and we were standing in the entrance hall at the same moment, and she recognized me before I recognized her. I was dressed differently than I had been at any of my appointments, and she had seen many patients since my discharge, and the context was entirely different. And nevertheless, she stopped and said my name with a slight upward inflection of someone who is not certain they are right, but believes they are. I said yes. She said, I thought so. I was looking at a post-op file last week. I pull old cases sometimes when I'm reviewing technique adjustments, and yours came up. You had a very clean outcome. I said I knew, and that I was grateful for it. She said, You're a guest here? I said that the birthday dinner was for my sister. She said Patrick had mentioned a colleague's sister. There was a brief reconfiguration as we both understood that we were at the same dinner. She said that was a coincidence. I said it was. She looked at me for a moment with the assessing quality that surgeons have, the habit of reading a person's physical state as information, and then she said, You look well. The gait is normal. How's the leg? I said, completely resolved, 18 months post-op. She nodded. She said, Good outcome. She said it the way she says most things, which is as a clinical statement rather than a compliment, which is one of the reasons I had trusted her. We went into the private dining room. It was arranged with round tables, 4 of them, seating 8. White linens, candles, the particular warmth of a well-run private room. Dr. Kuroda and Patrick were at table 6, which was diagonally across the room from the table where I was seated with my parents and Delphine, and 2 of Coral's university friends I did not know well. The dinner ran for an hour before Coral stood up. I want to give you the full texture of that hour because it matters. The room was warm and specifically social in the way that birthday dinners at good restaurants are social, the kind of gathering where people are slightly better versions of themselves because the setting asks for it, where conversations are more generous than they would be in an ordinary room. I had a glass of wine and talked to Delphine about a project she was working on and felt, for stretches of that hour, something close to ease. My mother had made a comment, when she sat down, about how well I was looking, in the tone that contains a question about whether the wellness is new or durable, and I had said I was fine and changed the subject, and then I had let the fine warm noise of 31 people at a good dinner carry me through the rest of the hour. Then Coral stood up. She stood with a glass in her hand, which produced the expectant quiet of a room that believes a toast is coming. She thanked people for coming. She said something about 35 feeling like a threshold, the kind of age where you know who you are and are not interested in pretending otherwise. She said she had been thinking, as the year turned, about what she wanted the next part of her life to look like, what she wanted to carry forward, and what she wanted to put down. She said she wanted to put down the pattern of managing a family member's needs that, in her honest assessment, were not as acute as they had been presented. She said that for the past 18 months, the family's attention and energy had been organized around a surgical recovery. She said those 2 words with a quality in her voice that I can only describe as quotation marks made audible, that she had come to believe was being extended and performed for the sympathy and accommodation it generated. She said, She just wants the attention. My mother nodded. My father said, in the tone of a man who has said something before and is willing to say it again, She has always been the dramatic one. 31 people heard both of those sentences. Dr. Hannah Kuroda, at table 6, was one of them. I put my hand flat on the table, not gripping the edge, just flat, the specific action of finding a surface. I looked at the candle in the center of our table. I looked at the wax collecting at the base of it. I did not stand up. I did not look at Coral. The room was making the particular noise of a gathering that has heard something that does not fit the occasion and is trying to locate the correct response. Then I heard the sound of a chair moving at table 6. Dr. Kuroda stood up. She did not stand the way a person stands when they are going to leave. She stood with the settled, unhurried quality of someone who is about to say something they have already decided. Patrick, to her left, looked at her with the expression of a man who does not know what is about to happen but can read the body language of someone who does. She said, in a voice that was clear and level and carried to every table without being raised, I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm Dr. Hannah Kuroda.
I'm a spine surgeon at the Regional Orthopedic Center, and I was Marin's operating surgeon 18 months ago. The room went quiet in a way that rooms do not often go quiet, not the polite quiet of a pause, but the total quiet of 31 people recalibrating simultaneously. Coral turned to look at her. Her glass was still raised. Dr. Kuroda said, "I have the operative summary in my email. I was reviewing related cases last week." She took her phone from the inside pocket of her jacket. The surgery was a microdiscectomy at L4, L5 for moderate to severe neural compression. The nerve was decompressing on schedule at the 2-week follow-up. The 12-month recovery timeline I gave Marin at discharge was standard protocol for that degree of compression and not a conservative estimate. She looked at the phone for a moment. Her outcome at 18 months is consistent with what the procedure was designed to produce. She set the phone face down on the table. She said, "I don't often find myself at the same dinner party as a former patient. When I do, I feel a professional obligation to make sure the clinical record is accurate." Then she sat down. The room held the silence for a breath that lasted longer than any single breath should last. Coral was still standing at the front of the room. Her glass had come down. Not placed, it had come down, the way a hand lowers when the arm has lost its purpose. She was looking at Dr. Kuroda with an expression that I have replayed many times and that I will describe physically rather than by its name. Her chin had dropped perhaps a centimeter. Her eyes had the quality of someone doing rapid internal calculation and arriving at a number they were not prepared for. My mother's hands were in her lap. My father had his eyes on the table in front of him. Delphine, to my right, let out a breath so controlled it was almost inaudible. I kept my hand flat on the table. I looked at the candle. I did not speak, did not turn, did not stand. I breathed in, and I breathed out, and I held the surface under my palm, and I waited for the room to find itself again. It took approximately 45 seconds. Someone at table 4 asked Patrick something in a low voice. I did not hear what, and Patrick answered, and the ambient noise of the room reconstituted itself around the specific event that had just occurred, imperfectly, the way conversation reconstitutes around a thing that has changed the room's composition without changing its furniture. Coral sat down. She sat down beside her boyfriend, a man named Theo who had been looking at the tablecloth since she stood up and who did not look up now. She picked up her fork.
She did not look at me.
She did not look at Dr. Kuroda. She looked at the plate in front of her and she cut a piece of something and moved it and did not eat it. The dinner continued. The main course was served. I ate. I talked to Delphine about her project and to one of Coral's university friends, a woman named Bex who turned out to work in public health research and who asked precise and genuinely interested questions about insurance analytics. I had a second glass of wine, which I had not planned to have, and I sat in my chair and let the warmth of the room carry me and did not speak to Coral and did not leave until the dessert course was finished and the natural end of the dinner had arrived. In the cloakroom afterward, Dr. Kuroda found me. She had her coat already and her bag, and she stood next to me while I collected mine, and she said, without preamble, "I want you to know that what I said in there is on the record. If you ever need a clinical summary for any reason, family, workplace, anything, my office can prepare one." I thanked her. She said, "The outcome was genuinely good. I want you to know that too, separately from tonight." I said I knew. She said, "I hope the evening doesn't cost you more than it should." Then she put on her coat and left with Patrick, and I stood in the cloakroom for a moment with my coat over my arm and thought about what she had said and found that it had the quality of a sentence I would return to many times. What followed the birthday dinner arrived over weeks and months, in the specific way that things arrive when a structure built on a false account has been publicly documented as false. Not in a single event, in a series of smaller adjustments that accumulated into something that could not be undone. The first adjustment was my mother. She called me 3 days after the dinner. Not to apologize, initially to ask. She said she had not known that my surgeon would be at the dinner. I said neither had I. She said, "So, it was, the recovery, was what you said it was." There was a quality in the question that was not entirely a question, the residue of 2 years of having accepted a different account, but the word was there, which was the first time she had used the past tense for the recovery without quotation marks around it. I told her what the recovery had actually been. Not the way I would have told her in the first months, with the urgency of someone defending themselves against an active accusation, the way you tell someone a fact that has been documented and does not require emotion to deliver. I told her about Dr. Ferris's original referral, about Dr. Kuroda's recommendation, about the imaging findings and what they had meant, about the 8 weeks, and why they had been 8 weeks and not 4, about the 12-month timeline, and what nerve decompression actually looked like in practice. She listened for all of it without interrupting, which was not how she usually listened. At the end she said, "I should have asked you at the time." I said I understood why she hadn't. She said that was not a sufficient reason. I said I knew, and I meant both things. The second adjustment was professional, and it took longer to become visible. Coral worked at Allgate Advisory. Allgate had, across its client and staff network, a set of social connections that overlapped in several places with the guest list at the Severn House. Dr. Kuroda's presence at the dinner was known in those overlapping networks. Patrick worked at a company with professional connections to 2 of Coral's colleagues, and the story traveled the way stories travel in those networks, specifically because the specific version is the interesting version. Coral had said something at her own birthday dinner. Her sister surgeon had been in the room. The surgeon had stood up. That version traveled. I do not know exactly what form it took as it moved through Coral's professional network, because I was not in those rooms. What I know is that Delphine told me, 6 weeks after the dinner, that Coral had stopped repeating the recovery narrative. That the version of me as the family's dramatic one, the 18-month performance, the milking of a routine procedure, had ceased to circulate in the places it had been circulating. Delphine did not know this because Coral told her. She knew it because she listened to the room she was in, which is a skill Delphine has that I have always valued. The silence where the story had been was its own kind of statement. The third adjustment was Theo. Theo had looked at the tablecloth during Coral's speech. He had not looked up when she sat down. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, Delphine told me, with the uncomfortable precision she applies to information she believes I should have, that Theo and Coral had separated. I do not know what the birthday dinner contributed to that outcome, or whether it contributed at all. I do not know what their private accounting had looked like before that evening. What I know is the tablecloth and the quality of the not looking up, and I hold that as information without drawing a conclusion from it, because conclusions about other people's relationships require more evidence than a posture. The fourth adjustment was Dr. Kuroda's letter. I had not asked for it. She sent it anyway, not to me, to my GP's office, as part of the standard post-operative documentation protocol that her practice follows for all patients. A copy came to me in the mail 6 weeks after the dinner, in an envelope from the Regional Orthopedic Center. It was 3 pages. It summarized the procedure, the post-operative course, the 12-month recovery timeline, and the 18-month outcome assessment from my final follow-up. It noted, in the language of clinical documentation, that my recovery had been consistent with the expected trajectory for this procedure and presentation, and that I had been fully cleared for unrestricted activity at the 14-month mark. I read it once at my kitchen table. Then I put it in the folder where I keep medical documents, which is organized by date and sits on the second shelf of my filing cabinet, next to my tax records and my insurance documents and the operating manual for the washing machine. The folder had always been there. The letter joined it. I am telling you this story 26 months after that birthday dinner. Dr. Kuroda's letter is in the folder. The folder is on the shelf. My back does not remind me of its history on most days, which is what a good outcome looks like in practice. Not the absence of a thing that happened, but its successful integration into ordinary life. I work at Veritas Group. 8 months ago, I was promoted to Senior Risk Analyst, which came with a restructured portfolio of 412 accounts, 2 analysts reporting to me, and a salary adjustment to $94,700 that I negotiated in a single conversation with my department head using a market comparison I had prepared the previous weekend. My department head said the number was at the top of the range. I said I knew, and that I believed the portfolio responsibilities justified it, and that I could speak to the specific modeling I had built over the previous year, if that would be useful context. She said it would not be necessary. The number was confirmed the following Thursday. Coral and I attended our parents' anniversary dinner in October, 8 months after the birthday dinner. It was a small gathering, just family, at my parents' house. We did not have a direct conversation about the Severn House. We talked about other things, her work, my work, a trip our parents were planning. The conversation had the specific quality of 2 people who have agreed, without saying so, to build towards something rather than confront it, and I found that I was willing to let it be that for now. What had been said in the private dining room at the Severn house had already been said. It did not require me to say it again. My mother came to our apartment for dinner in November, just her, without my father, which was her own initiative and which I received as what it was. She brought wine, and we cooked together, which we had not done since I was in my early 20s, and we talked for 4 hours about things we had not talked about in years. The birthday dinner did not come up. The hospitalization, the surgery, did not come up. What came up was everything else. Her work before she retired, the early years of her marriage, a trip she took in her late 20s before my father, a version of herself she had not described to me before. I listened. She listened. We ate dinner and drank wine, and at the end of the evening she stood at the door with her coat on, and she said, "I want to do this again." I said I did too. I want to say something about what it is to carry a clinical fact inside a family that has decided to ignore it. The fact itself does not grow heavier. It is the management of the distance between the fact and the story about the fact that accumulates, the constant peripheral awareness of the wrong version existing in rooms you are not in, the energy diverted into not correcting it constantly, the specific cost of remaining accurate in a context that has organized itself around inaccuracy. That cost is real. It does not show up in imaging. It does not appear in a surgical summary. But it is as genuine as the nerve compression that brought me to Dr. Kuroda's table in the first place, and it healed on a similar timeline, gradually with the occasional difficult day, and with the specific milestone of a moment when the wrong version simply could not continue to be maintained. That moment was a woman at table 6 setting down her fork. She did not do it for me. She did it because she had been asked to stand at a dinner and be Patrick's guest, and instead, she found herself at a table where her professional record was being misrepresented, and she had a choice about what to do with that. She chose to stand up. She had the operative summary in her email because she reviews old cases and because good surgeons do not consider a patient discharged until the follow-up record is closed. She stood up because she was the kind of physician who stands up when the clinical record is publicly contradicted in a room she happens to be in. I did not arrange this.
I did not know she would be at that dinner.
I had not even known, the week before, that I would be seated in the same room as the surgeon who had operated on my spine. What I had done was kept my records, followed my protocol, returned to my life, and kept being accurately myself in a context that had decided accuracy was optional. The record existed whether anyone consulted it or not. The difference between the night of the birthday dinner and every other night before it was a single variable: the right person was in the room. You do not have to manufacture the moment. You do not have to build toward it or time it or engineer the conditions. What you have to do is maintain the accuracy of your own account, keep the file, know the facts, carry the timeline, and trust that eventually the moment arrives when the record and the room coincide. When they coincide, you do not have to say anything. You just have to stay in your seat. The moment I return to most often is not Dr. Kuroda standing up. It is the sound of her chair moving, the specific sound of a chair on a hardwood floor in a quiet room, after my sister finished speaking and the room had not found its voice yet. I heard that sound before I saw her stand, and in the half-second between the sound and her rising I understood what was about to happen, and I kept my hand flat on the table, and I did not move. Tell me in the comments, was there ever a moment when someone chose to stand up for your record in a room you could not speak in yourself? Not because you asked them to, but because they knew the truth and decided the room should know it too? I read every comment. If this story reached you, leave a comment. And if you want to be here for the next one, subscribe and hit the bell. A new story goes up every week. Thank you for being here.